What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're going to be discussing my current chip strategy and more around what kind of transfers I'm looking at over the next few weeks when I'm looking to use my free hits, wildcard and stuff like that. And a lot of this is going to be based around the FA Cup 5th round draw, which we've had today, which gives us a little bit more insight into what matches could be played in game week 30, what players we should be looking at bringing in, and whether the chips are going to be needed. So if you enjoy it, give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new. Let's jump into it. Okay, so this is the FA Cup 5th round draw. Now, essentially, whichever Premier League teams win this round and go through to the next round, their game will be off, okay? So Luton versus Chelsea. If Chelsea win, they will then have a blank game week in game week 30. So if we go into the game week 30 fixtures, Chelsea play Norwich. So it doesn't matter what Norwich do against Liverpool, right? That game will be off because Chelsea have won, right? Just the same as if Crystal Palace beats Stoke, then the Crystal Palace game against Newcastle will be off, and that will be rearranged for later on in the season, and that's where you get the big kind of double game week in game week 36. So what I've done here is highlighted the teams that are the favourites to go through, and what's really interesting is most Premier League teams did not get drawn against each other, which means there's more likelihood of fewer games being on in game week 30, which I'll talk about in a minute. So Chelsea versus Luton, you would say are favourites. Palace versus Stoke, the same. Man City versus Peterborough, definitely. Liverpool versus Norwich is obviously two Premier League teams, but you would expect Liverpool to win that. Who knows, right? We'll have to see what kind of squad they put out. But I do think at this point in time for Liverpool, Klopp has got a bit more kind of squad depth than he maybe has in the past, right? Obviously, Salah and Mane are missing right now. They've got Luis Diaz on the pitch against Cardiff. Harvey Elliott's back. Firmino. Minamino's there as well. Obviously, Jota. So I think they can still win that regardless. And obviously, Salah and Mane will be back anyway by the time they play that game. The other kind of more interesting Premier League teams drawn against each other game is Southampton versus West Ham. Now, I've put West Ham as slight favourites, but given that it's an away game, I don't think they're complete favourites, right? It's not the same as Liverpool versus Norwich, and that game's pretty big because that could add another game into game week 30, which I'll come on to in a second. Spurs have got Middlesbrough. Leicester haven't played yet. Now, I did wait until Liverpool played before making this video, because if they had lost, that would have been big for FPL, because Liverpool versus Man United would have been on in game week 30. But because Liverpool are still in it, because they're still favourites to beat Norwich, that game will probably be off. But Leicester doesn't matter a huge amount. I'm expecting them to beat Nottingham Forest. You then expect them to beat Huddersfield as well in the 5th round. And then Everton have got Bournemouth or Boreham Wood, right? It's probably going to be Bournemouth. Now, what this means for game week 30 is, right now there's only 2 games on, definitely. Okay, so Wolves versus Leeds is on, and Villa versus Arsenal is on. It's all dependent on which teams have gone out of the FA Cup. So all 4 of those teams are out of the FA Cup. They will definitely play. So straight away, you got players like Aït-Nouri, Rafinha, Martinelli, Tierney, Ramsdale. All pretty good options, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. If West Ham beat Southampton, then Burnley and Southampton will be out of the FA Cup, and that game will be on too. Now, again, for a lot of the other games, like, you know, Man City, Chelsea, you're expecting them to win. I think this one's a little bit more difficult to call. If Southampton beat West Ham, right, and then we come on to the game week 30 fixtures, then West Ham would need Spurs to go out. Probably unlikely given their fixture, right? If we just remind ourselves, Spurs are playing Middlesbrough, so they should beat them. You never know, of course. Middlesbrough obviously beat Man United, but you'd expect Spurs to win that game, right? So if they do, then West Ham will be off anyway because Spurs will be through. And because Southampton have won, they can't play in game week 30, so this game would be off. So potentially, if I just come onto the right screen, there could only be 2 games in game week 30. What I will say is there's always some kind of upset. Will Crystal Palace definitely beat Stoke, for example? Will Spurs definitely beat Middlesbrough? Who knows, right? I'm sure one of the Premier League teams will lose. And obviously, the more that happens, the more games that can be played in game week 30. But right now, there's only 2. Leicester, obviously, if they lose their 4th or 5th round match, then they would play Brentford, because Brentford are out of the FA Cup as well, I believe. So that game will be on too. So right now we've got 2 definites. Burnley versus Southampton will be on if West Ham win. If every other team wins, that will be it. If all the other Premier League teams win, there'll only be 3 games on. Now, I'm going to come on to initial thoughts in a minute. That doesn't necessarily mean that the free hit is completely out of the question, because if you've only got like 3 or 4 players, you could say, well, there's only 3 games, but you could use a free hit to get up to kind of well, you go for 11 players, right? You'd have 3 at least from each team, 2 from one of them if there was 3 fixtures. That would give you 11 players. You'd have a lot more players than everyone else. It might still be worth it, but my initial instinct is we need to hedge our bets that maybe we're not going to use the free hit in game week 30. I'm going to talk about that more as we go along. Okay, I'm going to try and get some initial thoughts across based on the draw, because I do think it's a little bit of an addition to kind of Friday's video. We do have a little bit more insight now. Nothing's like set in stone, but we know that a bunch of Premier League teams have been drawn against non-Premier League opposition. So the chances are they probably get through in a lot of cases to the next round. I do think you're probably going to be able to get through one of game week 27 or 30, possibly both, without using your free hit, because there are going to be players that you can target that are just good now and are good for those weeks as well, that play in kind of both weeks, right? It doesn't mean that you have to not use your free hit in both weeks. It doesn't mean that you can't use, especially if you've got 2, one in 27 and one in 30, but the chances are you're probably not going to have to use them in both. The only issue that comes to mind is that because you don't find out the game week 30 fixtures until game week 28 deadline, you've got to make the decision about using the free hit in game week 27 before you kind of know that, right? You're just guessing, essentially. But really, unless you're going to triple up on Liverpool and kind of triple up on Arsenal, I don't really see game week 27 necessarily being a huge issue. What I would say is if you've got one free hit, I do think you can manage your team in game week 27 without using the free hit, and then you can decide in game week 30 whether you need to use it, and that will all be based on how many fixtures go into that week. But if we just remind ourselves, it might just be Wolves versus Leeds and Villa versus Arsenal that's on, possibly. If West Ham win again, you get Burnley versus Southampton, and it doesn't mean that you can't free hit, but potentially the need to use it becomes less and less. Right now, I think if I only had one free hit, I think I'd maybe be trying to manage game week 27 and then just see what happens in game week 30. And if you don't need to use your only single free hit for 27 or 30, that's not a problem, because although there's lots of games to rearrange, we don't know exactly when they're going to fall after game week 30. And because of that, having a spare free hit for a week where suddenly a few double game weeks get put in, you weren't prepared for it, you don't have the players, you can just pop your free hit. So if you can manage these game weeks, it's not a bad thing. The only thing I would say about game week 30 is, if there's a few upsets in the cup and suddenly a few fixtures are on that we were not expecting, then the free hit can still be worthwhile, even if it's like kind of 4 to 6 teams that you see as not very good teams. The free hit can still be beneficial, right? I've got a different opinion to some other people, not everyone, but some other people, right? A lot of people prefer to use the free hit when a lot of good teams are playing, like in a double game week. I prefer to use it when a lot of bad teams are playing in a blank game week, because those are the teams you don't want long term. Like, so for example, let's say in a double game you got like Liverpool, Chelsea, Man City are all doubling. Chances are you probably want a bunch of those players before and after the double as well anyway. So having them in your team is not a problem. If there's a lot of bad fixtures in game week 30, like, I don't know, Burnley versus Southampton, for example, you might not have a bunch of players from those teams. But if they're playing in game week 30, you might want a few just for that week, but you don't want them long term. So you can use your free hit and just go from there. So it's more about the points you can gain over the pack than the total points you get, if that makes sense. So if I have a team for a double game week and it gets 90 points, and instead I free hit and I get 100 points, well, I've gained 10 points. In a blank game week, if I would have got 30 for my normal team, but I actually get 50 with my free hit, well, I've gained 20 points. So it's not about the total amount of points. Right? Obviously, bigger numbers always feel better, but it's about the difference in points instead. So, again, I'm not saying you have to use it in game week 30, and if there was only 2 fixtures on, I'm not sure that I would. But if there was more than that, even if they're poor teams, it then becomes kind of very worthwhile. One thing you could do, potentially, if you free hit, we kind of got 2 windows, okay? You got game week 24, 25, 26 before the blank in 27. You could use some transfers to build for that week and for game week 30 possibly. And then from the game week 28 deadline, you'll know who's blanking in game week 30, and you'll have 28, 29, and then 30. So 3 more transfers to start preparing for game week 30. And if you get to 30 and you've got a team out for the blank, but you don't want it long term, if you've still got your wildcard left, that's when you wildcard in game week 30. You get rid of all the dud stuff, you've missed the game week 27 and 30 blank, and you just wildcard for the rest of the season, and you try and figure out a bench boost later on. If you've already bench boost, who cares, right? So you could dead end your team into game week 30. Dead end just means you build a team to the point where you know you're going to wildcard the week after and get rid of all the kind of deadwood. With wildcard, I've put need to save. This is really based on my team. I just don't see a reason to use it right now. The only kind of issue is with what I've talked about already. It's all well and good saying you use this little window to build for 27 and then the next window to build for game week 30. But I'm forgetting that there's doubles in 25 and doubles in 26. So you might be making weaker choices because you're building for blank game weeks later on, where you could be maximising points now. So again, it's not to say that the free hits shouldn't be used in 27 or 30. It's just that it's possible to not use them, I think. But if it means losing points in the double, you might still be better off doing it. It's all going to be your kind of team dependent. I think the wildcard is probably game week 31 onwards, maybe in game week 28, depending on what happens in game week 30. We're just going to have to wait and see. Okay, so a few more kind of initial thoughts, right? So the reason to wildcard later is we'll hopefully know more of the rearrangements. Hopefully, after game week 30, we'll start to find out exactly when some of the games are going to be rearranged. Not necessarily, but obviously you're hoping that happens. Leicester, for example, got lots of fixtures to rearrange, but no games right now. So we can get a few of those players in, maybe a few for the bench, etc. They don't have to be played every week, but they're there ready for all the games that they're going to have rearranged kind of after game week 30. Maybe we'll get some before then. We'll have to wait and see. But right now, they've just not been rearranged. Obviously, there's going to be some deadwood left over. There's going to be players from kind of 25, 26, 27 and 30 that you just don't want any longer, that you've carried through because maybe they're playing in a blank, maybe they had a double game week, maybe you just had other moves to make, but you can get rid of all them. And it doesn't mean that if you save your wildcard for post game week 30, that you have to use it in game week 31, right? You could use it a little bit later. Someone did ask me the question that if you save your chips, are you getting less points the longer you leave it? Wildcard is debatable. That really depends on your team. If you can pick up a bunch more points now and still get a good amount of points later, it's probably worth using it now. But I just think for my team, I don't need to do that. And I think with the free hit, that's just not the same because, like I said before, it's all about the kind of total amount of points, the kind of extra points you can get rather than necessarily the total points. And like I said, it does give the option of dead ending into game week 30. So my plan, I'm trying to delay the big decisions as long as possible. So it's all well and good just saying you can kind of hedge your bets by getting players that are going to play 27 and 30, but you don't want to, if they're not players that you really want in those weeks anyway, you don't want to load up on too many now. So you need to be careful about the ones you bring in. They've got to be good for you now and later on. By game week 28, we'll be locked in more to kind of some of the chip use. So like by game week 28, I'm going to know if I need to use my free hit in game week 30, which is why I'm going to try and delay that decision as long as possible. And yeah, got to make moves that are kind of good now and later. I was following Ben again on Twitter. He thinks that Burnley could double in game week 27. I think it's against Aston Villa. We'll have to see. 90% sure of that. And Wolves versus Watford could also move into that week. But he said he's only about 50% sure. There was a discussion between kind of he and Planet FPL and people like that are kind of really big on the rearrangements. And they're a little bit unsure about whether that fixture really needs to move to game week 27 because there's lots of times that could be played, right? They're not in Europe or anything like that, so there's no real worries there. So that could just be moved later on. So it's not necessarily going to go into game week 27. So loading up on Burnley and Wolves players just because they got back-to-back doubles is not 100% guaranteed to happen. If you do want to kind of start targeting players that have got a lot of fixtures that could be helpful to you, especially if you've only got one free hit left, then Wolves are going to double in game week 26, which we know. They're also going to play West Ham in game week 27, and they got Leeds at home in game week 30. So maybe Kilman, Aït-Nouri, Semedo, kind of defenders you could look at. Maybe Jimenez if you need a forward as well. Especially, again, if you've only got one free hit or if you're trying to save both your free hits to not have to be used in 27 and 30, possibly could look at getting Wolves players. The fixtures in between that are not necessarily great. The double isn't even that good, I don't think, from a defensive point of view. So someone cheap that can mostly sit on your bench could be good. Like Jimenez, I'm not really sure I'd necessarily want him long term. The only reason he probably kind of stands out a little bit is because there's not a huge amount of forward options right now. So again, you've got to be careful about how many kind of Wolves players you stock up on. Similar with Leeds, they've got a double in 26. It's not great, but I do think the fixtures either side are okay. They got Spurs in 27, Wolves away in game week 30. But realistically, it's only really Rafinha that you want to look at, and he probably is going to be one of my transfers soon. And then obviously Arsenal, they do have blanks in 25 and 27, but they do double in 26 and have Villa in game week 30, guaranteed to play in game week 30. So Ramsdale, Tierney, White, Saka, Martinelli, all players you could look at. Now obviously, if you load up on a lot of Arsenal players, like 2 to 3, and you've kind of got 2 to 3 Liverpool players as well, probably 3 given they're double in 26, you are kind of maybe forcing yourself in to a free hit in 27. But if you've got 2 free hits, I think, you know, if you've got triple Arsenal and they're all obviously going to play against Villa in game week 30, that probably takes away the need to use it in game week 30. Again, we might get a bunch of other fixtures there we're not expecting, and you might wish you had the free hit, but you can maybe hedge your bets a little bit. I'm not saying you have to bring in like all of these players right now, but if you're struggling to make a transfer, these are probably the players that I would look at. Maybe Burnley players, but I don't know if they're definitely going to have the double in 27, although Ben seems pretty sure. So that could be back-to-back doubles. It could be worth looking at. But these are the kind of players that I'd be targeting right now. Alright, so I thought I'd run through kind of my plan for my team as it stands. Now, I need to wait for injury news, press conferences and stuff like that before I lock into any decisions. I'm going to talk about my team for game week 24 on my team selection video tomorrow anyway. But I thought I'd go for a rough plan, kind of talking through the kind of how I'm going to try and hedge my bets whilst also kind of you know, trying to get through kind of game week 25, 26, etc. This is also going to kind of show you how, yes, I can build later on for 27 and 30, but it does kind of hurt my team maybe a little bit for game week 25. Maybe I'm dropping some points now to gain them later on. Obviously, you know, Leicester I've already spoken about. If they were to lose either of their FA Cup games in the 4th or 5th round, then suddenly I've got no Leicester players. They're playing in game week 30. That might mean that I'm more likely just to use my free hit there. So we're going to have to wait and see. I think for me, it's a little bit easier because I've got both my free hits. So it doesn't matter if I, you know, use one in 27 and then I'm forced to use it in game week 30. It's not such a big deal. If you've only got one, it's a little bit more trickier, because you're not quite sure which of those 2 weeks yet you're going to need it in because of today's draw. So that's interesting to see. Anyway, this is my team. And by the way, people kept asking me where it's from. I did put FPL.team as the title, but it wasn't very clear. That's the website, right? FPL.team is the website, and then you can go onto the planning tool. So this is my team for this week. I'm not going to swap captains and stuff like that around. It's just extra work for no benefit for this video. So I'm probably going to sell Trossard. Now, although he has a double next week, he's got no game this week, so he's no real good to me. So if I bring in a player with a game this week and next week, I'm not really losing a fixture necessarily, although I could just play my bench over him instead. But I'm probably gonna, I've got 2 free transfers as well, it's worth saying, so I've got to use one, right? So I'm probably going to sell Trossard, and I'm probably going to bring in Rafinha, okay? So I'm going to put him in, and I'm probably going to play Gray against instead of King, sorry. You know, Newcastle away, hopefully he starts, better fixture, etc. And then I'm going to keep Alonso one more week. The fact that Livramento was back in the FA Cup is really good for me because he's just been on my bench for a while. And now I've got 2 outfield players on my bench, and obviously I've got kind of Foster as well, who I can put on the bench as well. So my bench is looking okay right now. So that's game week 24, 1 transfer used. Obviously I'm now going to roll 1 into game week 25. Now this is the week Man United obviously double. So you've got De Gea and Ronaldo. So I've just sold Trossard. I do have enough money, and I haven't completely written this kind of transfer off. This is more of a team selection type decision, but I do have 3.5 in the bank, right? So I could use both the transfers, downgrade Alonso to someone cheap, which I'll probably do. Maybe Ain't Nuri, because the thing is, although I think Arsenal have got a better double, Ain't Nuri does give me the option of maybe not having to use my free hit in 27 or 30. And again, that's a decision I need to make next week because, again, I may be losing points now to gain them later, and that might not be worth it. I might just be better off using my free hit. But I think I can get away with my transfer this week by bringing in Rafinha and worry about that the week after, right? See if things have changed. But let's say I bring in Ain't Nuri. That gives me enough money to sell Foden or Jota to get Fernandes. And I could captain Fernandes over Ronaldo. Still a debate to be had about whether that's a good choice, but I think Fernandes is just looking good in the new formation for Man United. But let's just say I roll the transfer. So I do Alonso to Aït-Nouri. I put him on the bench. I play Dawson instead. It's not ideal, but I don't think there's not really a defender who's cheap that I can bring in for 25 who's got a better fixture than Dawson that I also want long term. Even if I bring in like Ben White, he blanks in game week 25, so it doesn't make any more difference. So again, I'd probably just roll with this team. 2 double game weekers, De Gea, Ronaldo. Ronaldo would obviously be my captain, and I just leave it like that. Then we come into game week 26. So Aït-Nouri goes in, of course. King comes in as well for Gray because he's got the double game week. And I'd probably play Foster over De Gea with Palace at home and Villa away. Like, they've got the clean sheet against Burnley. Hopefully they could get one more in this week at least, maybe some save points as well. So suddenly then I've got 1, 2 in Aït-Nouri, 3 in Trent, 4 Rafinha, 5 Jota, and 6 with King. 6 double game week players. Arguably Foster and King, maybe you shouldn't count them, but whatever. And I've still got 2 free transfers left. So at this point, I would probably sell Foden for Salah, which I think I can afford straight off the bat. Yeah, just about can afford that. And I'd probably also sell Ronaldo for Harry Kane. Now, I know that one of Kane's fixtures is not great, but Man City away, okay, it's not great, but it's 2 fixtures plus the fixtures afterwards are pretty good. So that's 26. Then we move on to 27. Now, this is when a lot of blanks happen. Now, one thing with Game Week 27 is, for me, I've not bought any Arsenal players. Now, I can go back to Game Week 26. I could bring in an Arsenal player here like Martinelli, but I would have to do it for a hit if I want Salah and Kane. So I could take out Gray for Martinelli, but I'd have to bench one of Bowen and Antonio. They've got good fixtures. So I don't know if it's worth doing that to then give me more problems in Game Week 27. So in 27, like if I just bench all my players that aren't, that haven't got fixtures, so Salah, Jota, and Trent, okay, the team is not perfect, but I've not used a chip and I've not used a transfer either. And obviously, I played De Gea over Ben Foster, so I've got Aït-Nouri against West Ham. Although yes, he is playing against 3 of my West Ham players. And I've got Livramento against Norwich. So he's back in the team. That's a pretty good fixture. This ain't looking too bad. And I do think I could use a transfer to sell Jota at this point, because by that point, Diaz is playing as well. Firmino's there. Salah and Mane are going to be back. There might be some rotation. I don't know if it's definitely going to happen too much, because I think Jota has just played better than Firmino this season. But I could sell him and get in another player that's playing in 27. And then I probably don't need to use the free hit. The only thing I'm really missing is Man United attackers. But Kane captain against Leeds just seems okay to me. So I think this is all right. And then obviously I could go further and further. But Game Week 28, you just bring all your Liverpool players back in. Obviously, you know, Aït-Nouri could even play, to be honest, against Crystal Palace. Gray, I'll take out for Trent. That could be the team, possibly. Again, it doesn't really matter right now because I'm not using any transfers past this point. But you see the point. By bringing in Aït-Nouri, it means I'm less susceptible to having to free hit in 27. And then if I get stuck in Game Week 30, then brilliant. I'll just use one and I've got one for later on in the season. If I can get through Game Week 30 without using a free hit, I'll just use both my free hits after Game Week 30. It might not be ideal. There might not be a situation where we get a lot of chances to use it, but there'll probably be some with the amount of fixtures that we rearrange. And at some point after Game Week 30, I'll use my wildcard. And here's one thing that I've not kind of spoken about. If you save both your free hits for after Game Week 30, or even if you save one, it might mean you can delay your wildcard a little bit longer. So if you get to, okay, let's just not make any transfers, right? Let's say I get to Game Week 31. This is my team. Liverpool have got Watford at home. Okay, I've probably sold Jota by this point. But right now, this team looks fine for Game Week 31, right? So I don't necessarily need to wildcard it. Okay, so let's say I've only got one free hit left. I used one in Game Week 30. This is the team for Game Week 31. Team looks okay. I can use transfers as well, of course. But if there's a load of doubles that suddenly go into this week for whatever reason, I could free hit, have this team back for Game Week 32. Looks a little bit weaker. Livramento against Chelsea, the Liverpool boys against Man City. I could then wildcard then, or maybe in Game Week 33, whatever it might be. So I do think there's quite a bit of benefit possibly later on to saving the free hits. But right now, I think my main plan is just to hedge my bets a little bit with my transfers. Rafinha this week, who has Villa, then Everton, then a double, then Spurs, then Leicester, then Norwich, then Wolves. Like, it's okay fixtures for a player that's nailed as long as he's fit. Then I get Aït-Nouri next week. And so, like I said, I've hedged my bets a little bit. I've not forced myself in to which chip to use. So that's kind of where I'm looking at the moment. There we go. Hopefully that was useful. Give it a like if it was, and hit subscribe if you're new around here. Plenty more videos to come. Like I said, I'll have my team selection video tomorrow. Like with the FA Cup draw, I do think that it's made it possible to get through 27 and or 30 without using a free hit. But if you've only got one, it's a little bit tough to know exactly when to use it right now. I would just try and kind of delay the decision, maybe hedge my bets as long as possible. One thing I didn't mention was that if Villa do get a double in 27, that possibly makes the free hit better to use, because you could triple up on them and get rid of your Arsenal players and get rid of your Liverpool players. But also it makes bringing them in maybe a little bit better as well, because then they also play in game week 30. So we're going to have to wait and see how the fixtures kind of fall. But the FA Cup draw is definitely interesting. So like I said, if you enjoyed it, give it a like, hit that subscribe button. I'll be back tomorrow with my team selection video. We'll have game week preview on Tuesday, so you'll get the chance to ask a bunch of questions. Otherwise, I'll leave it there and I'll catch you again soon.